The sun burned hot and golden over the sprawling Hampton estate, gilding every glass, every ripple of the Olympic-sized pool, and every forced smile with a sheen of false perfection. Music floated across the manicured lawns, where Boston's elite gathered its silk dresses and tailored linen suits. Laughter mingled with the clink of champagne flutes, a carefully orchestrated symphony of wealth that made the afternoon seem like a scene. From a magazine spread, servers in crisp white uniforms wove between clusters of guests, balancing silver trays of canapes, their eyes trained to remain invisible. Children squealed with delight as they leapt into the shimmering blue water, their splashes echoing like fireworks in the heavy summer air. On the far side of the pool, in the shade cast by a towering marble column, Ethan Blackwood sat in his wheelchair. At 6 years old, he was a small figure in a world too large and loud, his thin frame wrapped in a polo shirt his father had insisted upon, his legs, limp and motionless since the accident 2 years ago, rested heavily against the chair's footplates. He watched the other children race, tumble, and cannonball into the water, his dark eyes following each arc of motion with a hunger he could never admit aloud. Swimming had once been his joy, the one place he had felt free, but now he could only sit on the sidelines, hands folded in his lap, trying not to let the ache in his chest show on his face. Richard Blackwood moved among the guests like a commander surveying his troops. At 45, the self-made tech magnate had turned Blackwood Technologies into a billion-dollar empire, and he carried his success like a crown, his broad shoulders stiff, his jaw always set in a hard line. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, and laughed at the right moments. But his eyes darted constantly, measuring, judging, ensuring that nothing strayed from the image of flawless control. His son, sitting alone by the pool's edge, was a blemish he did not want noticed. Richard believed in fixing problems with money specialists, therapists, machines, but nothing had restored Ethan's legs, and that was a truth he could not bear to face. Vivian Blackwood stood nearby, her diamonds catching the sunlight, but her gaze was never steady. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when necessary, yet her eyes often drifted toward her son. A shadow of guilt lingered there, though she hid it well under perfect makeup and rehearsed elegance. She had nearly drowned as a child, dragged under by a current during a family holiday in Florida, and though she had survived, the water still lived in her nightmares. When Ethan begged to swim before the accident, she had turned away, unable to watch. Now, she kept her distance from the pool, her fear mingling with her maternal guilt, creating a silence between her and the boy who needed her most. Across the lawn, Lily Rodriguez wove quietly among the crowd, her tray already heavy with abandoned glasses. At 17, she was tall and lean from long hours of work, her dark hair tied back neatly, her uniform clinging in the summer heat. Her mother, Rosa, had worked as the Blackwoods' housekeeper for years, and Lily had grown up in the shadows of these parties, invisible to the wealthy guests who never saw her as more than part of the decor. But Lily was not invisible to Ethan. When she caught his eye from across the pool, his face lit up with the kind of warmth his parents rarely drew from him. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, as she crouched beside his chair, her voice soft enough not to draw the wrath of Richard's watchful gaze. Ethan's lips curved into a smile. "Lee, I've been counting the cannonballs. 27 already." His eyes gleamed for the first time that afternoon, alive with the simple joy of sharing a secret with a friend. The party roared on, oblivious to the fragile world forming in the shadows of the poolside. Richard shook another hand. Vivian retouched her lipstick, and champagne glasses continued to sparkle in the sun. But the only moment that mattered was the boy in the wheelchair, and the janitor's daughter kneeling beside him. In that quiet connection, stronger than the glimmer of diamonds or the roar of wealth, a story had already begun, one that would shatter the illusions of everyone present. Before the day was over, the sun dipped lower in the sky, softening the golden glow of the Hampton estate, but not the weight of expectation that hung over the party. The laughter grew louder, the music pulsed brighter, but beneath the polished surface was a quiet storm waiting to break. The clinking of glasses masked the small sounds at the pool's edge, the creak of Ethan Blackwood's wheelchair as it shifted forward, the faint scrape of its rubber tires edging too close to the shimmering blue water. No one saw, no one cared. Ethan leaned forward, eyes locked on a small remote-control boat darting across the surface. The other children shouted in delight, their voices sharp with energy and freedom, while Ethan's hands twitched uselessly against the arms of his chair. He wanted to be closer, to feel like he was part of their world instead of a shadow stuck in the margins. Inch by inch, he edged nearer, his wheels rolling over the smooth stone. Lily Rodriguez balanced a tray of half-finished drinks nearby, weaving through the crowd. She had trained herself to watch the details others miss crumbs under a table. Glasses about to topple, and the quiet boy in the wheelchair whose eyes never left the water. Something in Ethan's face made her pause, the tilt of his body, the angle of the wheels. Her heart jolted. "Ethan," she called softly at first, testing if her eyes were lying to her. He didn't look up. The boat skimmed across the pool. Again, drawing him forward. The chair tilted slightly. Lily's stomach dropped. "Ethan," she shouted now, her voice breaking through the buzz of conversation. She let the tray slip from her hands, glasses shattering against the stone in a spray of sound that finally made a few heads turn. But it was already too late. The wheelchair tipped. The splash was not the sharp crack of a cannonball or the playful dive of a child. It was heavy, weighted, muffled like a stone dropped into the depths. Ethan plunged headfirst into the water, his chair following like a cruel anchor dragging him down. For a split second, the pool swallowed him whole, his small frame vanishing beneath the surface. The party did not stop. The music played on. Guests blinked in confusion, some glancing toward the noise of broken glass rather than the silent struggle beneath the water. But Lily saw his arms flailing, his eyes wide with terror, the bubbles rising too fast as his body sank deeper. The world narrowed to that image, the boy sinking into blue. Silence. Without a thought, she kicked off her shoes and dove. The water closed over her head with a shocking chill. She opened her eyes against the sting of chlorine, searching through the blur until she saw him, Ethan, sinking, twisting helplessly, his legs like stone, his small hands clawing at nothing. The wheelchair glinted dully as it settled on the pool's bottom, a cage that had followed him even here. Lily kicked harder, lungs burning, hair swirling around her face. She reached him, wrapping one arm tight around his chest. He was so light, yet so heavy in the water, his body resisting every desperate pull upward. For a moment, she feared she wouldn't make it. That thought cut through her like ice, but she refused to let go. Above the surface, the world was only just beginning to notice. Rosa Rodriguez dropped her tray, screaming her daughter's name as she watched bubbles rise from the depths. Vivian Blackwood's shriek cut through the party like glass. Her hands clutched over her mouth as she froze at the water's edge. Richard stormed forward, demanding to know what had happened. His voice thunderous, but empty of action. Underwater, Lily fought. She kicked, pulled, clawed her way upward with Ethan in her grasp. Her lungs screamed for air. Her muscles shook with strain, but she pushed harder. When they broke the surface at last, her gasp for breath sounded like a cry of war. "Someone, help us," she shouted, water choking her words, Ethan's head bobbing in her arms. "He's not breathing." The crowd surged forward then, screams replacing laughter, panic replacing ease. But for those eternal seconds, it was only Lily and Ethan, a janitor's daughter dragging a millionaire's heir back from the grasp of death. While the world hesitated to act out, and in that moment, though no one knew it yet, the balance of power at the Hampton estate shifted forever. The moment Lily's cry pierced the air, time fractured. For a breathless instant, the world seemed to hold still, then chaos burst like a dam breaking. Guests surged toward the pool, their polished shoes slipping on the wet stone, dresses brushing against splashes of water. Mothers pulled their children back, shielding their eyes, while others lifted phones, already recording the unfolding disaster. The party, once a polished parade of wealth and pride, had transformed into a storm of fear. Ethan lay on the concrete, water streaming from his small body. His lips were tinged blue, his chest unmoving. The boy who had once filled the Blackwood estate with laughter now looked like a fragile doll abandoned by fate. Richard Blackwood dropped to his knees beside him, his hands shaking in a way no boardroom had ever seen. For the first time in years, the empire-building titan had no words, no commands that could bend the world to his will. "Do something," Vivian screamed, her voice tearing at the silence. Her diamond earrings glittered as she fell beside her son, reaching but not daring to touch. The water still terrified her, and now it seemed to rise up from the stone itself, mocking her. She wanted to cradle Ethan, to shield him, but her fear of drowning wrapped chains around her limbs. She could only sob, broken and helpless, as her child slipped away before her eyes. The security guard shoved forward, his training overriding panic. He pressed his palms against Ethan's chest, counting each compression, his voice steady though. His brow was slick with sweat. 1, 2, 3, breathe. He tilted the boy's head back, forcing air into his tiny lungs. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath with each push, each pause. Waiting for the miracle they feared might never come, Lily stood apart, soaked to the skin, her hair clinging to her face. Her chest heaved with exhaustion from the rescue. But her eyes never left Ethan. She didn't care that no one offered her a towel, that no one thanked her, that most barely noticed she existed. She cared only for the boy whose laughter had always been softer when she was near, whose loneliness mirrored her own in ways no one else could see. She pressed her hands together, whispering under her breath, "Please breathe, Ethan, please." Richard looked up at the security guard, rage and terror mingling in his face. "Why isn't he breathing? You can't let him die." His voice cracked, a sound that startled even himself. For all his power, for all his money, he could not buy another breath for his son. The guard didn't answer. His hands moved faster, firmer. Ethan's chest rose and fell under each push, but still no sound came. Seconds stretched like hours. The party's music had fallen silent, leaving only Vivian's sobs and the desperate rhythm of compressions echoing across the estate. Then sudden and violent, Ethan convulsed. Water burst from his mouth in a coughing spray, his body jolting as if life itself had been yanked back from the abyss. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Vivian collapsed forward, clutching her son's hand, tears streaking her face. Richard froze, relief flooding his eyes, though pride kept his hands from trembling visibly. Ethan's lashes fluttered open. His chest rose with weak, ragged breaths. He turned his head slowly, searching the blur of faces above him, not his father's sharp features, not his mother's tear-stained face. His eyes stopped on the girl still kneeling a few steps away, dripping wet, trembling but unbroken. His small hand lifted, shaking, barely strong enough to point. "The girl," he whispered, his voice hoarse and fragile. "The girl saved me." Every eye in the crowd followed his hand. They saw her then not just a housekeeper's daughter in a soaked uniform, not just the invisible shadow clearing their glasses, but the girl who had jumped into the water when no one else moved, the savior of the heir to the Blackwood fortune. Richard's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked from his son to Lily, and something darkened behind his eyes. Gratitude warred with pride, with the gnawing realization that his empire, his reputation, his perfect image, all of it owed his survival to the daughter of a janitor. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, rushing toward the estate. Blue and red lights would soon pierce the golden dusk. The paramedics would take over, the world would find out, and nothing would ever be the same again. But in that moment, it was only Ethan's trembling hand and Lily's wide, tear-filled eyes that mattered. Their bond had been sealed in the depths of the pool, forged by fear, courage, and breathless survival, the kind of bond no wealth, no pride, no polished light could ever erase. And though no one knew it yet, the story of the Blackwoods had changed forever. The sterile glow of Boston Memorial Hospital's pediatric intensive care unit could not disguise the weight of fear pressing against the Blackwood family. The humming machines filled the silence like an unholy choir, steady beeps marking Ethan's fragile breaths, the rise and fall of his small chest amplified by tubes and monitors. Behind the glass wall, nurses moved with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting wires. Their faces practiced masks of composure. But for Richard and Vivian Blackwood, each second stretched into eternity. Richard paced the corridor like a lion trapped in a cage, his Italian leather shoes striking against the polished tile, his face pale beneath its usual armor of control. He had never feared boardroom battles, had never blinked at market crashes or hostile takeovers, but the sight of his son's limp body on the poolside haunted him. No amount of money could shield him from the truth that had clawed at his heart. Ethan had been seconds away from death, and the person who had saved him wasn't a doctor, a bodyguard, or some high-paid specialist. It was the janitor's daughter, Vivian, sat hunched in a plastic chair, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared from hours of tears. Her trembling hands held a crumpled tissue, but her eyes never left the window into Ethan's room. She remembered the way her son had reached for Lily, the way his voice, barely a whisper, had named her as his savior. Vivian had felt both shame and awe in that moment. She had frozen by the pool, paralyzed by a childhood terror of water, unable to save her child. But Lily, just a teenager, just the daughter of a housekeeper, had done what Vivian could not. That truth gnawed at her, softening the shield of distance she had carried for years. The squeak of rubber soles announced Dr. Sarah Chen's arrival, petite and sharp-eyed. She carried the calm authority of someone who had walked families through the valley of fear countless times. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," she said gently, "Ethan is stable for now, but we are monitoring him closely. Secondary drowning is still a concern. His lungs absorbed a dangerous amount of water." Vivian gripped the arms of her chair, her voice breaking. "When can we see him?" Dr. Chen hesitated, briefly. "He's been asking for someone named Lily." The name lingered in the hallway like a forbidden word. Vivian's tear-filled eyes flickered toward Richard. He stopped pacing, his face tightening into a mask of disdain. "Absolutely not," he snapped. "She's not family. She doesn't belong here. She's the only reason your son is alive," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling but sharp. Richard turned on her, his jaw clenched. "We pay for the best care, the best staff, the best doctors. Do you think I'm going to let some girl with wet shoes and no future waltz into his hospital room like she belongs here? If we let her in, she becomes part of the story. Do you want the press tearing us apart with headlines about how a janitor's daughter saved the heir to Blackwood Technologies while his parents stood frozen? Do you want our lives dissected, our name dragged through every news cycle?" Vivian looked away, ashamed because she knew Richard was right about one thing. The media was already circling. Reporters had swarmed the estate before the ambulance had even left. The world was hungry for stories that broke the illusion of perfection, and this story was explosive. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria downstairs, Lily sat across from her mother, still in her damp clothes, her hair tangled from the dive. A paper cup of untouched coffee cooled between her hands. Rosa's face was pale, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Mija, we should go home," she whispered. "You need dry clothes, rest. This is not our world." Lily shook her head, her voice tight. "Not until I know he's okay. You saved him, Lily. You did more than anyone expected. But these people," Rosa hesitated, glancing at the polished walls around them. "They will not thank you. They will forget you the moment he breathes without pain." Lily's hands clenched around the cup. "I don't care if they forget me. I care about Ethan. He was so scared, Mama. He reached for me. He needs me." Rosa's eyes softened, filled with both pride and fear. She reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's trembling hands. "You have a good heart, but good hearts break easiest. Don't let them break yours. Back upstairs." Dr. Chen's words replayed in Richard's mind. He's asking for Lily. The truth he wanted to bury had clawed its way to the surface. His son didn't want him. He didn't want the doctors or the nurses or even Vivian. He wanted the girl Richard had dismissed as beneath them. Ethan's monitor beeped steadily behind the glass, his chest rising and falling, his eyes fluttering open, and the first word he whispered was not Dad or Mom. It was Lily. The sound reached Richard like a knife, a reminder that all his power, all his pride, had failed him. His son's life had been saved not by the empire he had built, but by the courage of a girl he considered disposable. And for the first time in his life, Richard Blackwood felt the one thing he had always despised in others' helplessness, but deep inside, another storm brewed, darker and more dangerous. Richard's pride would not surrender quietly. The war for Ethan's heart had only just begun. The hospital had grown quieter as the night wore on, but the silence was heavy, not peaceful. Machines hummed steadily in Ethan Blackwood's room, each beep a fragile promise that life still clung to his small body. Nurses came and went, adjusting tubes, checking vitals, but no one could soothe the boy. He lay still, his lips pale, his dark eyes open but distant, staring at the door as though willing it to open. Every time a nurse entered, every time Vivian stepped close, he whispered one name, Lily. Vivian's heart shattered a little more each time. She stroked his damp hair, kissed his forehead, begged him to drink water or eat the small cups of jello placed on the tray beside his bed. He refused. His eyes would dim, his lips pressing together in a silence that frightened her more than any scream could. He was waiting for the girl who had pulled him from the depths while everyone else had frozen. Richard stood in the corner, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Each refusal from Ethan cut him deeper, though he'd never admit it. To him, this wasn't just about a boy's recovery, it was about control, about power. His son's first instinct, his son's first plea was not for him, it was for her. the janitor's daughter, and that reality was like poison dripping into his pride. Dr. Chen met Richard outside the room, her face calm, but her voice firm. "Mr. Blackwood, your son's recovery depends on stability. He's refusing food, refusing to cooperate. His vitals are stable now, but without nourishment, without emotional support, his condition will weaken. He is asking for Lily. You need to let her see him." Richard's jaw tightened, his words cold. "No, that girl doesn't belong here. My son needs trained professionals, not some teenager who smells of chlorine in cafeteria food." Dr. Chen's eyes hardened. "Your son nearly drowned. He has been through trauma. What he needs right now is not another machine, not another order shouted across the room. He needs comfort, and if comfort comes from the 17-year-old girl, then so be it." Richard's face flushed with restrained fury. "Do you have any idea who I am? What my family name means? Do you think I will let the press turn this into a circus? Headlines about how the mighty Richard Blackwood couldn't save his own son, but the janitor's daughter did. Do you think I'll hand them that humiliation?" Dr. Chen did not flinch. "Humiliation is a luxury your son cannot afford. Pride is a poison that will kill him faster than water in his lungs. If you want him to live, you will let her in." Vivian, who had been listening from the hallway, finally stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice carried a strength Richard had not heard in years. "Richard, she saved him, and I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Do you know what it feels like to watch your child drowning and feel the chains of fear drag you down to? That girl did what we couldn't. She risked everything for Ethan, and now he's calling for her. Not you, not me, her. You may be too proud to admit it, but if you love your son, you'll let her in." Richard's face twisted, his pride fighting against the truth hammering at his heart. For years, he had built walls around himself, walls of wealth and power, walls that kept out shame and weakness, but those walls were cracking. Downstairs, in the cold glow of the hospital cafeteria, Lily sat with her head bowed, exhaustion pulling at her body. Her clothes were still damp, her hair knotted, her skin pale from the chill. Rosa sat beside her, holding her hand. "We should leave, Mija," Rosa whispered. "This place, it isn't for us. They will not want us here." But Lily shook her head. Her eyes, red from tears and chlorine, lifted stubbornly. "He needs me, Mama. I know he does. I saw it in his eyes. He was so scared, and when he woke up, he looked for me, not them, me." Her voice trembled, but her resolve was steel. "I won't leave him." At that very moment, a nurse approached. Timidly, "Are you Lily Rodriguez?" she asked softly. Lily stood, uncertain. The nurse's eyes flicked toward the elevator. "Dr. Chen asked me to bring you upstairs. Ethan's condition isn't improving. He keeps asking for you." Rosa clutched her daughter's arm. "Be careful," she whispered, fear flickering in her eyes. But Lily only squeezed her mother's hand, then followed the nurse with her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. Upstairs, Richard stood rigid, his pride screaming against the decision. But when the door opened and Ethan's small face lit up, when his frail hand reached out, with a joy no doctor's treatment could have inspired, Richard's heart faltered. Ethan whispered one word, stronger than any he had spoken all day. "Lily." The monitor steadied. His breaths grew calmer. His pulse quickened with life, and in that moment, everyone in the room knew the truth Richard had tried to deny. The janitor's daughter was the one thing keeping Ethan alive. But outside, beyond the sterile glass, reporters gathered like vultures. The story had already leaked. The millionaire's son saved by a janitor's daughter. Headlines were spreading. Cameras were waiting. Richard Blackwood could feel the empire he had built trembling beneath him. And for the first time in his life, he realized the battle was no longer about money or power. It was about his son and the girl who had become his lifeline. The morning light cut through the tall windows of Boston Memorial like a blade, striking Richard Blackwood where he stood in the corridor. He hadn't slept. His suit, once immaculate, was wrinkled at the cuffs, his tie pulled loose. His world had always been about control of his company, of his family, of his image. But this morning, the front page of every paper and the lead story on every network was a narrative he had not written. Not the billionaire's son saved by a janitor's daughter. The words burned him more than fire. Paparazzi were already lined outside the hospital gates. Social media was flooded with images of the girl, hair dripping, clothes clinging, arms locked around Ethan as she dragged him from the pool. Someone had filmed it. Someone had posted it. Overnight, Lily Rodriguez had gone from invisible servant to heroine, and Richard Blackwood, master of empires, was nothing more than a father who froze while his son drowned. Inside the room, Ethan had color in his cheeks again. Machine still hummed, but his smile was brighter than it had been in months. Lily sat beside him, her damp uniform finally replaced with borrowed hospital scrubs. She was reading softly from a children's book, her voice steady even as her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Ethan clung to her hand, his gaze never leaving her. Every now and then he'd interrupt with a question, or a giggle, or simply to whisper her name as if to remind himself she was still there. Vivian stood near the foot of the bed, watching. For years, guilt had wrapped her in chains, the guilt of her water phobia, the guilt of her distance. But now she saw something she had never allowed herself to see before. Her son was alive, not because of her wealth or status, but because of courage and love. Courage she had lost long ago, love she had buried beneath fear. Richard entered without knocking. His shadow darkened the room, and even Ethan seemed to sense the shift. The boy's grip tightened around Lily's hand. "I want to talk to my son," Richard said, his voice low, commanding. "You can talk in front of me," Ethan replied quietly, his voice hoarse but clear. "I want Lily here." Richard's jaw twitched. He hated the way his 6-year-old defied him, hated the way his son's loyalty lay with a girl from the servants' quarters. But there was no time for anger now. The press was circling, investors were calling, and every moment he spent watching his son cling to Lily was a reminder of the power he no longer had. Later that afternoon, reporters finally broke through hospital security. The corridor filled with flashes, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled like stones. "Mr. Blackwood, how does it feel to know your son was saved by a janitor's daughter? Is it true you tried to keep Lily Rodriguez away from your son? Will your family acknowledge her role publicly?" Richard's face hardened as he shoved past them, refusing to answer. But his silence was an answer in itself, and the headlines multiplied. Inside Ethan's room, Lily flinched at the noise outside, at the flashing lights bouncing through the glass. She had never wanted attention. All she had wanted was to make sure Ethan was safe. But now the world knew her name, her face, her act of bravery. And with that knowledge came a weight she wasn't sure she could bear. That night, as the hospital quieted again, Vivian sat across from Lily. Her voice was soft, unsteady. "I need you to know something," she said. "When Ethan was drowning, I couldn't move. I froze. I let my fear control me, and if you hadn't been there," her eyes filled with tears, "you saved my son's life. You gave me a second chance to be his mother." Lily lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "I didn't do it for thanks, Mrs. Blackwood. I did it because he's my friend." Vivian reached across, taking Lily's hand. "He needs you, Lily. Don't let Richard scare you away. Promise me that." But Richard was already plotting. He had summoned his legal team. He would control the narrative, silence the noise, bury the girl's story under a mountain of press releases and corporate spin. To him, Lily was a liability, a threat to his power, his image, his carefully crafted empire. Yet what Richard didn't see was the storm rising against him. The world loved underdogs. The world loved truth cutting through privilege, and in Lily Rodriguez, the janitor's daughter who had dived headfirst into danger, without a thought for herself, they had found a heroine too powerful to silence. Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring her name even as dreams carried him away. Lily brushed the hair from his forehead gently, her touch light, protective. For her, it wasn't about headlines or power struggles. It was about a boy who had been left on the sidelines for too long. A boy who had finally found someone who saw him not as a burden, not as an heir, but simply as Ethan. And though the Blackwoods had yet to admit it, a battle was coming, not just in boardrooms or courtrooms, but within the walls of their family. Pride versus humility, image versus truth, money versus love. The girl who saved Ethan's life was about to change all of theirs. The day of the press conference arrived with the weight of inevitability. The Blackwood estate, once a fortress of polished pride and untouchable power, was now surrounded by cameras, satellite vans, and reporters shouting questions into microphones. The iron gates rattled under the pressure of onlookers desperate for a glimpse of the boy who had nearly drowned and the girl who had saved him. The story had taken on a life of its own. Across Boston, across the country, the narrative played on every screen. The billionaire's son rescued by the janitor's daughter. Richard Blackwood stood in front of the gilded mirror in his study, pulling at the cuffs of his suit, practicing the mask of confidence he had worn for decades. His empire had been built on appearances, control, command, and the illusion that he was always untouchable. But behind his eyes flickered something new, desperation. This conference was his chance to seize back the narrative, to rewrite the story before it swallowed him whole. Down the hall, Vivian helped Ethan into a small suit. The boy's wheelchair gleamed, polished to perfection, but Ethan didn't notice. He tugged at his collar, grimacing, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, do I have to do this?" Vivian knelt before him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Her eyes softened with the kind of honesty she had denied herself for too long. "No, sweetheart, you don't have to do anything you don't want to, but your father—" Her voice faltered. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan knew. He looked past her then, toward the corner of the room where Lily stood in borrowed clothes too big for her frame, her hands folded nervously. She had been invited begrudgingly by Vivian's insistence, but Richard hadn't spoken a word to her. To him, she was an intruder, a blemish. To Ethan, she was everything. When the family appeared on the grand steps of the estate, the crowd erupted. Flashes exploded like lightning. Questions hurled through the humid afternoon air. Richard lifted his hands, commanding silence, his practiced voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As you know, my son Ethan suffered a tragic accident, but thanks to quick responses and excellent medical care, he is recovering well. We are grateful." Ethan's small voice cut through the speech like a knife. "That's not true." The crowd stilled. Richard froze, his eyes darting to his son, a warning hidden behind his controlled smile. "Ethan, let me finish." "No." Ethan's voice trembled, but grew stronger as he continued. "I almost died, and no one saved me except her." He lifted his hand, trembling but certain, pointing to Lily where she stood just behind them. "She jumped in when everyone else just watched. She's my best friend. She saved me." The reporter surged forward, microphone straining. Cameras swung to Lily, who stood pale and shaking, caught between fear and a steady, unwavering look in Ethan's eyes. Richard's jaw clenched. "Ethan, this isn't the time. It's the only time." Ethan interrupted. His words were soft, but their power echoed louder than any speech his father could have given. "Dad, you didn't see. You didn't even move. She did. I wouldn't be here if not for her. I don't care about your company or your parties or what people say. I care about her. I want her in my life. Always." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivian's hands trembled as she pressed them to her lips, tears welling. For years, she had hidden behind silence, behind her fear of water and the shadows of her husband's pride. But now, hearing her son's truth spoken so bravely, she stepped forward. Her voice cracked, but she forced it through the roar of the press. "He's right. Lily saved him. She is the reason our son is alive, and no amount of wealth or power could ever repay that." The crowd erupted in shouts and flashes. Headlines were being written in real time. Richard's control was shattering before the world's eyes. He tried to speak, to seize back the narrative, but the words caught in his throat. The cameras had already turned away from him. They were fixed on Ethan, on the boy who refused to let his truth be buried, and on Lily, the janitor's daughter, whose quiet courage had stripped away the illusions of wealth and power to reveal something raw, undeniable, and human. In that moment, the balance shifted forever. Richard, who had once commanded rooms with his presence, was reduced to silence while his son's voice carried through every broadcast. Vivian, long paralyzed by fear, found her strength in admitting the truth, and Lily, who had been invisible, became a symbol not just of courage, but of the power of compassion that transcends every barrier of class and privilege. As the press shouted her name, Lily's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Ethan, and he smiled, his small hand reaching for hers. She took it, her grip steady despite the trembling in her chest. The world would write their headlines, investors would scramble, reputations would crumble. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was a boy who had nearly drowned, a girl who had dived into the water when no one else moved, and a truth that no empire could silence. Ethan leaned close to her, his whisper carrying only for her ears. "You gave me back my life." And Lily, for the first time since the accident, allowed herself to smile. The crowd roared. The cameras flashed. But for Ethan and Lily, It was only the beginning of a story that would outlive all the headlines.